All right. So today on the podcast, we're switching because I was a guest last time. So now we have the two guests here, Bryan Boorstein and Aaron Straker. How you guys doing?
I'm doing well, man. I'm just happy to be here with you. Glad we get to do this.
Yeah, we good.
Same. Happy to be here.
So Aaron, I'm sure this is not remotely creative, but how many times have you heard A-Aron from the
Oh, I mean, when that Key and Peele thing came out, like people think it's the first time. Like I haven't heard it before, and they're
Right.
like, "Hey, Aaron, have you seen that? Has anyone said that before?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they have."
Right. Yeah. So Bryan, I just wanted to, talk about our DMs we had back and forth on our strength level here because I made a joke to the audience of Bryan that I'm basically, he is me, like shrunken down 3 inches, or I'm him 8 years later, just extended because we have very different bodies. But what was your best overhead press with dumbbells?
Dumbbells, 80 something for like 6 to 8, probably.
Okay. And we talked about OHP with barbell. I think we had almost identical, right? I think
Yeah, it was like a 215 single, and you were like a 225 or something like that.
Yeah, and like 185 for like five. We talk about pull-ups. I think we both did like 75 for eight or something like that, 8 to 10.
Yep.
Our incline dumbbell bench was like identical. Our split squat was identical. I mean, just like and I think our front squat, right, 315 for a few reps.
Yep.
So it's just kind of goes to show that like, strength is really important and we focus on progression, of course, but you can have people with the same strength that have vastly different bodies, even different as like more different than ours are. It's kind of crazy to see.
Yeah, that was like the whole, like when we did our podcast, and I was so curious about that relationship between hypertrophy and strength, and whether like genetic potential of one leads to genetic potential for the other, et cetera, et cetera. And you and I are examples of like, well, I got this hypertrophy spectrum where like the muscle attachments, insertions, and whatever it is,
Right.
and then you got the same strength level as me, but just as a taller human, and
Yeah.
it all just kind of appears a little bit different. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. Now, Aaron, I don't think, well, actually, before we get into that, for just the audience, let's just get an intro for you guys because I'm talking to you guys because I obviously, Bryan, I've talked to you for, I don't even know now, but I feel like maybe over a year or something.
Yeah,
And
probably.
then, Aaron, you and I were introduced recently. But for anybody who maybe didn't see when I was on your podcast, can you just get a background on you guys, maybe how you guys know each other and what your fitness space background is?
Go for it, Straker.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with how I know Bryan. I was a longtime member at Bryan's CrossFit gym from like 2011, 2012 to like 2015, 2016, when we were both in San Diego, California. So that's how I met Bryan. And then just that was a massive part of my life for a very long time, which was really, really awesome. Just a great environment, and was able to learn a lot from a bunch of cool people, including Bryan. And then background on me, I'm a sports nutritionist primarily. I have a nutrition coaching program called the Metabolic Performance Protocol that I work with male clients in primarily, and focus on a lot of the nutrition and lifestyle side of physique. So kind of my background into why I did that and took that route. Obviously, especially as a male, like the training takes it's just much more sexy, right? But the approach I took was like, okay, I already knew so many good people like Bryan, right? Writing like really incredible programming. I wanted to find a different way that I could be very, very effective. So that's why I went the nutrition route, lifestyle, and now it's just like a can of worms. So that's what kind of got me started. Now I'm spending a lot more time, a lot of my energy and focus learning more on like the functional nutrition side to better drive, even more results from optimizing different parts of the metabolic system.
Awesome. All right. And I mean, we're definitely going to dive into that. But how about you, Bryan?
Yeah, totally. CrossFit gym for a while. That was kind of like my second or third level of fitness. We can get into it, but went through the early years of training a certain way, and then more into the bro split, and then started a CrossFit gym in 2010 with my best friend from college at the time. And Aaron was a member there for a while. We sent a bunch of teams to regionals. I coached a couple athletes to the CrossFit Games. Came out of CrossFit in kind of 2015, 16, 17 range. It was a gradual process. Started a couple companies, Evolve Training Systems, where I have general and I do some individual coaching through there. And then I partnered with a girl, Lori Christine King, and we started Paragon Training Methods in 2018. And we have mostly general programs there with kind of like individual feel through like the community Facebook group and video analysis and stuff like that.
Awesome. So there's actually a couple comments that we had on the other podcasts that I kind of want to delve into, not to steal from if we ever do a part 2 on your channel, but I'm sure there's going to be some crossover. And Bryan, something that you and I had talked about, I think in DMs, was that we talked about training splits, and you had said, which I think if people, you have like the CrossFit background, and I think a lot of people who watch either of our podcasts would look at it and say like, okay, so we're into programming and like specificity and things like that. But you have said before, well, if somebody was doing a bro split for, a long period of time, over 10 years, would that actually make a big difference compared to somebody who had everything, what we call properly programmed and whatnot? And it's actually an argument I had with an acquaintance of mine, Steve, who's a bodybuilder as well, and he's a physician. And he has very good physique, and he's just done a bro split like forever. And obviously, he hasn't grown much in the last 4 or 5 years because he's kind of already maxed out, but he's got a great physique. And he said, so he actually is in physical medicine and rehabilitation. So he is like, I want to be able to do something forever and not just for like a couple of years. And even if I programmed 3 times a week frequency right now, maybe I'd get better results short term, but I don't think it's going to make a big difference long term. And I've kind of come around more to that, if my client says, hey, I mean, I obviously want to get my clients the fastest results possible. Not always, but I mean, usually. And in that case, I might really try to dial in. But if we're talking about over the course of a lifting career, I'm not really sure it matters too much. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I actually am reminded of, wasn't it you and Scott Stevenson and Cornelius talking about this relatively recently too?
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's of course like a psychology to it, right? Like if you're just somebody that really doesn't enjoy training the same muscle group multiple times a week and you'd rather just go in and just destroy it and move on, like that's kind of your prerogative thing, especially if you're somebody that doesn't need more than 10 sets per muscle group per week, right? Because if the research is it states pretty obviously that anything over 10 sets is, gonna turn into less effective volume than it would be if you stay under 10, which is probably the number one rationalization that I would see for why you would need a 2 times a week frequency, because most people's volume needs are bigger than that. Mm-hmm. I still kind of fall on the side of thinking that if you had 10 sets a week as your maximum adaptive volume, if you want to put it that way, that still splitting it into 2 sessions of 5 would probably still be more advantageous. And I just think about like my own quad training or back training or any muscle group really, but like, man, 5 sets of quads and like I need 10 sets a week, like doing those 5 sets after the first 5 sets just seems kind of unnecessary. So I think that there's that aspect. And then looking at the bro split side, though, like you have connective tissue potentially. Like I think Scott may have brought that up, that's something that now you only hit once a week instead of having to do it twice a week. So I think that there's an argument there too. But like you kind of alluded to, man, over the course of your lifetime, I don't know that 15 years of a hard bro split training would keep you from reaching the same genetic peak that maybe you would get from 15 years of doing it evidence-based.
Right. Yep. How about you, Aaron?
Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of the things that Bryan said there. The psychological aspect of it and what you actually want to do is a big underrepresented or undervalued aspect, I think, because if it's not practical for you, then you may not end up actually doing it long term, right? So it's a massive like consideration to make. I agree. Like I did the bro splits in college, and it kind of burned me out. I just realistically, I'm not going to go in and have an arm day. I'm not going to go in and just do arms. It doesn't interest me in that regard. So splitting the volume up across multiple days, even equating volume, I just found is a much more realistic approach for myself. And I know a lot of people feel that way. And it's been really cool that the kind of evidence-based community and the current research has shifted towards that, towards like, twice training weekly or something, or even more. So I think, again, my bottom line is I think the preference and individual preference and real practicality of you actually accomplishing it and performing it is what is going to be the biggest driver there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Like you were saying, Bryan, that like even like 10 sets seems like a lot in one session. And I guess it's been a long time that I've been doing lower volume, and I don't really even think about it now as lower volume. Cause like for instance, my workout tomorrow is upper body. So it's still going to be like 18 to 20 sets, like work sets, to pretty close to failure. And I mean, I'd like to do that, but if I was doing any more volume than in one day, it would just take me forever. So then, yeah, you probably would need to split it up in a different way. But even because I actually think bro splits can be fun. It's been a while since I've trained that way, but I think they can be fun. But even when I was doing them, I mean, it might be like 3 sets first chest exercise, and then maybe like 2 sets and 2 sets or something like that, so you're looking at 7. But like, I just never related to people who are doing like 16 to 20 sets in one session for chest. It's like, how many pressing and fly movements can you do in one day, especially if you're going even close to failure? I mean, I guess, and that's probably where my bias lies, right? Like I push intensity pretty high. So I guess if I was doing 3 RIR and 3 RIR and then 3 R, like, but even that just sounds incredibly boring to me. But
yeah, I did the whole 20 sets in one session per muscle group thing. And I remember consistently getting like a small shoulder tweak, and it would always happen in like the last 5 sets of chest day. And it's because like my chest is just so fatigued by the end of it that there's really like nothing happening there.
Right.
And so the shoulders are taking over whatever movement I'm doing, whether it's like a dip or a fly or an incline press, which were kind of typical movements I'd have toward the end. Like, I just always ended up hurting myself. And this was even coming right out of CrossFit, like latter into my years before I kind of fell into like some of the RP and Steve Hall stuff. And I just remember seeing the whole research about the 10 sets in a session being the most really that makes sense. And as soon as I began implementing that, the quality of the work that I was doing just skyrocketed. And I think that like just the quality that you can put in when you're doing less, you don't hold anything back. Your mind muscle connection is much better. And what I've realized is that I can get like the best pump that I need from the second set of a movement. Like sometimes it's the first set. Like sometimes I'm even warming up and I'm like, whoa, my biceps are pumped right now. It's a warm-up set, right? But like, so usually it's like this second set sometimes. But I don't know what I was doing. Like I remember feeling that pump and just being like, did I really just train like through this and continue it? And then it went away. And then I don't really know what's happening after that.
Yeah, no, it's a lot. I mean, both of you kind of talked about like the mindset of it. And I think, I guess if your mindset, if like all of us, I think focus on progression, but if you're kind of still like new to this and maybe you're thinking like, well, it's just about crushing the muscle, then yeah, maybe you think that like this is doing it and wow, it's my biceps are so fatigued. But I think when you shift to like, no, we're looking at like not just this session, but the next one and a year from now, once you start doing more than like, I don't know, 6 sets maybe for biceps or something like that, it's just like, I mean, I was even saying before chest, but yeah, once you start talking about like isolation exercises, it's just like, I mean, there's really only so many variations,
Yeah, there's only so many movement patterns you can train, right, for a specific body part. The one thing that's always been really interesting for me is when people are doing like a lot of volume per body part on like one day, is your output drops off so hard after like, let's say maybe that second exercise, if it's chest and you're doing like an inclined barbell and then you do some sort of fly and then you go to like maybe a flat dumbbell for that third exercise, like you're using at least like a decrease in like 30 to 40% as if you were fresh.
Yeah.
And I'm just hard pressed to believe that you're actually getting like really quality effective, not only movement pattern out of it, but like contractions and stuff, because the muscle's already so fatigued.
Yeah. I will say, I guess in defense of that to a small degree, is that it does seem, so certainly anytime I've moved like a primary exercise from like first to second, I'm immediately significantly weaker, right? But over time, I kind of get used to it in that position. If I ever move it back to number one, it hasn't gotten proportionally stronger. It only works like one way, but my body does seem to get used to it. And honestly, like I set like a personal best for bench press recently, and that was actually after shoulder pressing. And I find that like for me, I don't know if it's just how my shoulders and everything are warming up, but I actually feel like it goes smoother for me. Just, one example where I actually like bench pressing now after shoulder pressing. Excuse me. Now this is kind of like lower rep shoulder pressing. I'm doing like 3 sets of 5, right? So it's not, if I were to do like 3 sets of 20, I think I'd probably just be torched. But I do think, and this is, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, but like for exercises that as I've gotten a little bit older, I have to be a little more cautious with, I actually like to throw them in at the very end. Like I just incorporated leg press again. And I do that after like leg extensions, leg crawls. I actually put it at the end there. And it's not a ton of weight, but now it's way harder to do. and I just feel much less injury potential with that.
Yeah, putting movements that scare you or that like the higher injury potential piece a little bit later, and it almost is like an ego piece as well. It's like, okay, I don't have to push this movement as hard because of where I placed it.
Yeah.
So I had to go through like a period like that with hip hinging in general, because coming from CrossFit, I had this association of like, I can deadlift over 500 pounds, but my deadlift over 500 pounds wasn't like a good looking deadlift. So to make sure that I was hitting the right muscles and hip hinging properly when I started transitioning into like the stiff leg deadlift and RDL variations, I initially actually like I went up to like, 315 for sets of 10, and it didn't look good. Like it looked like the deadlifts that I was doing in CrossFit back in those days. So I had to basically assess my ego and be like, okay, I am unable right now in this moment to do RDLs properly and just drop the weight to 225. So I'm going to put them at the end of the leg session, use 185 or 225, and actually get the stimulus I'm supposed to get from it, build the proper muscles, and work from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's something that I've recently like doing a lot is moving. Like today, for example, right? I had leg extensions and leg curls before hack squats. And then I can use less weight on the hack squat. My legs are already a little bit fatigued. So I can really just focus on like movement quality, full deep range of motion instead. And it still gives me like just as gnarly of a stimulus, but at less weight, easier on my joints, especially like right now I'm training legs 3 days a week. So that was a big concern of mine was my knees. But I mean, they feel great, which is awesome because I was really concerned.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. And Bryan, at first I thought you meant like you have to check your ego, which you do. But I think also you were saying how, like in a way, it takes the ego out of it because you know it's not going to be as strong. So you can kind of like reset your form and everything, which is great. Because I mean, I, even after all this time, have a hard time where I'm like, you know what, I really need to reset my form on this exercise and just, and we all know that if you really like slow down the movement or really concentrate on like the, if you want to say mind muscle connection and all that, you can make a weight that's like 60% of what you were using really hard. It's kind of like sometimes you'll do it like, geez, like maybe I shouldn't be going so heavy. And it creeps up on you, right? If you're focused on progression, like sometimes I'm maybe even like too focused on progression. And, I'm like, okay, incorporating leg curls, I'm going real slow. And by week 20, I'm like, this isn't the form I started with,
Yeah. No, I video myself like literally at least one set from every movement that I do throughout the week. And that tool has been awesome because like, especially with hip hinges, and that's just like a big one for me. Like I had such an ego with it, right? That I have this tendency to get a little bit of a posterior pelvic tilt when I'm doing heavy hip hinging, and not that that's bad necessarily, but I think that what it does is it makes it easier for me to lose a little bit of lumbar position when I struggle through that kind of concentric. So I've been really focused not on eliminating the posterior pelvic tilt, but in making sure that I really am going to like the depth of the limit of my hamstrings and hip hinging ability, so that I'm not just like butt going back and then torso continuing to fall, but filming it from an angle that really allows me to see what my low back is doing, so I can make sure that the first thing that moves is that my chest is rising and that hinge is occurring, instead of, even if it's a small bit of back flexion that takes place, like really having to hold myself accountable. And it's difficult.
Aaron, you mentioned you're training legs 3 times a week now. Are you just trying to build up like from a hypertrophy standpoint, or why are you doing that?
Yeah, basically, I have a coach right now, and we've been working together since end of August or end of July for the second time. And he basically was like, "Listen, we need to get those legs up. Like everything else is great. Like your legs are severely lacking. We just need to do that." And it's been a goal of mine for a couple of years, but this is the first time where and this is something, you and I and Bryan have talked about a little bit, like a specialization type cycle where I've always kind of wanted to do it, but I've had those fear of like, oh, well, I'm not getting as much volume in my chest or back as I, normally would. And those might not be progressing. But this is the first time where I've like fully bought in, and I'm like, I'm okay if my like back and shoulders stay exactly where they are.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty normal to have maintenance.
They're okay. I'm okay with that. But like my legs I've been talking about growing them for like 2 years now. And like, it's time to finally start doing it. And they are, it's been pretty sweet. But I mean, the hardest part is, training legs 3 days a week is just brutal from like a psychological standpoint. They're just much more challenging days.
Yeah. Well, I did sprints Thursday, legs and sprints yesterday, and then sprints today with like 10 minutes before this podcast. So my heart, I feel like a little weak right now, which by the way, anybody listening, I usually would not recommend hit 3 times in a row. I just, for certain reasons, I was doing it. So Aaron, and I'm going to tell you the same thing I told Bryan. I was like, you guys got to take measurements, because I love the pictures that Bryan just posted, some good pictures on what he's changing. And I think it's great. Measurements to me, and measurements aren't flawless either, right? I mean, if we're talking bodybuilding, it's how do they look? And I totally get that. I just think it's very hard to take the exact same angle, the exact same lighting, everything exactly the same. And sometimes it's both ways. Pictures can be really deceiving and look like more progress has happened, but they can also be really deceiving and make it look like no progress has happened. I just kind of have a physique where in certain poses, I have 2 pictures that are like 20 pounds of muscle apart, like when I was like years and years ago, and you can see there's progress, but on me, it just doesn't show in these pictures that much. Where some people, they put on 5 pounds, it's like a transformation, right? Depending on muscle shape and all these things. So I just love to see measurements. So just, I don't know if you've taken them already or not, but
I have from when I started.
Yeah.
I have the tape in the closet somewhere, but it was one of the things that when we moved, it just hasn't been. I
just think it's one good thing. Legs are also hard to measure because it's like to get the exact, biceps, you got that peak, it's right there. I've always found it hard to get the exact same spot on legs,
Mm-hmm.
When I was like 14, I actually took a pen. I just put a line there, and I was just like, all right, it's going to stay there. The tattoo there.
That's amazing.
So just real quick on that again, Aaron. So what are you doing differently? Is it just the frequency, or are you just focused on getting stronger? Like, what are you doing to actually specifically bring them up?
So frequency and volume. Like okay. Volume is, we do have one day is a little bit lower. It's like a power type day. Reps are all like 6 to 8 rep range. Some are up at 10, and that's nice because it's not like it's like a fun day. I get to go in, lift a little bit heavier, but it's like lower volume. It's not like nauseating at all, right?
Yeah.
And that's Monday. And then then Wednesday, I have like a hypertrophy day, and that's like a little bit more higher 12s. 15s, everything's mostly in the 12 to 15 rep range. And that is, that day is challenging, right? So it's like 4 sets of 15, heels elevated back squat. That's like, and that's how it starts, right? And that's like, a punch in the guts, right? From the first start. And it's a lower, I don't do that many exercises on that day specifically because of that. And then I have, that's on Wednesday, and then I don't have any legs Thursday or Friday. And then Saturday is basically just a bunch of supersets. So it's like supersets, leg extensions, leg curls, a lot more higher reps in the 20s, and then sets of 15 on the hack squat. So it's really pushing like frequency and volume.
Are you in the camp of keeping a lot of reps in the tank, or how hard are you pushing?
So everything usually about 1 to 2 RIR. The leg supersets day is the day I kind of like open it up. And like today I failed a couple things early, but I did go up in weight this week. So like I got like, instead of 20 on my last set of the leg curls, I only got 17, but I was up 5 pounds from last week.
Gotcha.
So those ones are a little bit harder, pushing it a little bit. But the one thing I did want to say is I'm also eating like 4,000 calories per day and then, 570 grams of carbs. So it's a lot of food to support, that volume of training, legs or whatever.
Yeah, I definitely want to delve into the nutrition because there were some comments you made before. But do you guys believe that there's kind of like a common sentiment in bodybuilding that, if you have like upper body is kind of more amenable to changing, that lower body seems to be a little bit more genetically determined, that like for some people, they just have it, right? It's like, I'm sure you guys saw the post of my cousin, right, with his legs and that comparison. And people would be like, I don't even know if you said this, but some people messaged me and they were like, well, he's got to play football, right? Well, he's done this. I'm like, look, I know this kid very well. He does body weight squats every once in a while. That's it, right? And he's just got these huge legs. And some people, and I don't think your legs look bad, but I mean, certainly your upper body is bigger, proportionally than your lower body. It just seems like some people have a much harder time building legs. And I guess a big confounding variable is a lot of people just don't train legs as hard, right? So, I mean, that's a huge variable too.
I agree. I was one of those people who, was reading, T-Nation back in like the late 2000s and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, all you need to do is squat heavy. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'll squat heavy. And I did that for a long time, but they just never grew. And I think some of it's, you know, all of us are a little bit taller and longer limb lengths. It's harder to get in that mechanically advantageous position unless like, especially for a strength movement, right? So like me squatting for strength and me squatting for hypertrophy, I will change what I'm doing a little bit for force production.
Right.
Because we were, you know, in CrossFit and then I was in Olympic weightlifting and stuff like that. I squatted differently that would allow me to move weight, and my glutes and, you know, lower back and hips are much stronger than my quad. So that would always kind of take over. So I think that was a large portion of it. And two, like training legs is just objectively harder. It's not, I mean, I enjoy it, but I get sick sometimes after. I don't get sick after shoulders or back or anything like that. I feel great. Right. I feel like I'm like, oh man, I'm fucking huge. This is great. After legs, like I'm like shaking, walking down the street and stuff. And I just want to go home and lay on the floor.
No pump to show off.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that it's like twofold.
Yeah, I echo what Aaron said. Basically, the first 3/4 or more of my training life was spent trying to move weight from point A to point B, and not really even thinking about how I got there. It was just get it there as quickly and as fast as possible. And that just wasn't a great way for me to build legs. It's a great way for some people to build legs. Like I have plenty of friends that never did bodybuilding and have awful upper bodies. Anders is a great example, Aaron. And he has really big legs. Like he just put a post on his story challenging my quad growth post that I made, being like, check my legs out. Right. And like, and he has great legs.
Or he doesn't work out that much.
He does. He does like, 20-minute EMOMs and CrossFit, and, you know, he'll squat 265 for 10 a couple times, like once a week or something like that. But like, he just has good legs, you know? So he played hockey growing up. He used his legs a lot. They grew. He squatted a lot when he was younger.
Yeah.
And again, you and I have talked about this whole thing of like, does it really matter what you did when you were younger? And I have this theory that like, I'm good at weighted pull-ups because I thought weighted pull-ups were so cool back in the day. And like, that's probably not true, but he squatted a lot and he has big legs, and I'm really good at pull-ups and I used to do them a lot. So, you know, N of 2.
Yeah. Well, no, we can talk about that because it's funny because a lot of people are like that, right? I had a friend in college and he was like, well, I think I have really big calves because I used to walk on my toes as a kid. And it's like, dude, like people, like a lot of people don't know like the crazy stuff I've done to try to get like anything out of my growth. So my entire freshman year of college, I was on the 9th floor, and it was like, you know, like double staircase each floor. Every time I would go anywhere, I would walk all the way up and down on my tiptoes every single time just to see. And it made zero difference, right? And so I do think I have some of the more stubborn calves. So it's not to say that something that didn't work for me wouldn't work for somebody else. But like I've done 100 rep calf workouts daily. I've done everything you could imagine, and nothing really mattered. But to your point about like the hockey, it's like, you know, like a lot of things. Well, were you better at hockey? Like, were your legs growing because you were a hockey player, or were you actually really good on skates and everything because you had this development in your legs, right? Maybe for you had a naturally good back. Like I had pictures when I just started working out, and I remember my dad, when I was like 14 and we were on the beach, commenting to his friend about my back, right? But like, I actually grew up doing push-ups. I never did pull-ups ever, right? But my chest is proportionally, like muscularly, a weak point for me compared to my back. But like, you know, it's a pretty significant difference. I'd say maybe a weak point versus a strong point. So I tend to think people gravitate towards what they're good at. And then you say, wow, like you're so strong at this. It's like, and you know, you just rationalize that, well, it's because of that, when I think the order is actually reversed a lot of times. Same thing with sports, right? You know, playing basketball didn't make you tall. You just happen to be 7 feet tall, you know? So.
Yeah. No, that's a really interesting point, because I always sucked at bench press. And so I was always like, you know, fuck the barbell. Like I'm never going to barbell bench because I'm just so bad at it. Right.
Yeah.
And I swear, over the last 23 years of lifting, I think I've barbell benched for 2 years consistently.
Yeah.
Which I told you in DM actually, but pull-ups and rows have always been movements that like just worked for me. Like I was always strong at them. People were always impressed. I could row 225 before any of my friends could, but I was still like benching 135, you know? So yeah, I mean, very good point.
Yeah. And another point on that is like, people will ask me, and again, I'm not saying I have this amazing back, but proportionally I have a good back. And it's like, oh, what's your routine? Pull-ups and rows. Like I don't get weird with it. Like I never had to, right? It was just, that's just what worked for me. But like other muscles, I'll try, like chest, I've tried like so many variations, and some do work better than others. I'm not trying to say it doesn't make a difference, but that's why I asked Aaron maybe if you were incorporating, if it was just a volume thing, or you had to incorporate maybe some new exercises that you felt hit it better than, whatever. But it sounds like you kind of had that process earlier.
Yeah, that's one thing, not to kind of derail the conversation, but in the last maybe like 9, 10, 11 months, picking exercises that I can feel really, really well for the target muscle group, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, right, like I love a hack squat. I think it's really, really great, especially for me, because like I said before, my back overpowers like my freestanding squats. So the hack squat kind of takes that apart. But if I am using a hack squat where, like, based on my levers and positions, I can't get into a good position, I'm not going to use it. It's like the gym I was at before we came to Mexico here had like one of those hack squats where it just like wasn't working. Like my feet, I just couldn't get in that position. I'm like, I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to use like the Smith machine or as like as a replacement or something like that. And I'm a big proponent of like either changing how you perform a movement to make it fit your, levers and how your anatomy is, or finding a better exercise.
Yeah. That was an argument I had with somebody who, he's a kind of a big name in the industry, but I said, like, he was trying to tell me, we were talking about exercise variation, and he was like, no, like, once you've maxed this one out and then go to this one and then go to this one, and like all these different variations. And he's telling me how he's still progressing because he's doing this. And the guy's like, I don't know, 45, 50 years old. And it's like, you're not, to me, switching to a new exercise and then gaining strength on exercise is not inherent progression, right? Because there's a huge period of time where you just have this neural adaptation and you're getting better at the exercise. So I am for exercise variation, but to me, I'm like, I think there are a lot of examples, yourself, probably myself, all of us at times, where the standard exercises might not be best for you. And finding the right exercises for you is actually really important, right? Especially if you have like unusual levers and stuff like that. But in my opinion, once you've found those, depending on the muscle group, 3 to 5 exercises that are like really good for you, I'm not sure I see a huge advantage to then saying, okay, now switch it up with another 5 exercises and another 5. Like, to me, you're going to work the muscle well for you with your, your limb lengths and things like that. And then I don't know. I'm not like huge on variation beyond that point.
Aaron and I were just talking about this on our episode we did yesterday, the day before, the neural adaptation piece. Mm-hmm. And we both kind of feel that this like process of neural adaptation to a movement is like really long, like way longer than people give you credit for. Like I've heard someone say that you could just change in a barbell curl if you haven't done a barbell curl for 3 months, and that you would just be right where you left off and it would be all good. Yep. But like I was just saying on our podcast, like I feel like I can go from 95 to 115 and as the sets are equally difficult, 95 for 10 and then 100 for 100, 105, 110, 115, before I actually feel like, okay, now my neural adaptations have subsided. And that's like, 5 weeks of training. On something like a squat or a more compound movement, it could take 8 to 10 weeks for me to really feel like, okay, I'm at a point now where it's actually hard to progress and I'm really fighting for each rep.
Yeah. And that's actually something I was talking with, I had Brad Loomis and Jeff Alberts on a couple months ago, and we were talking about the barbell curl. And I think Jeff was saying, he's like, yeah, well, like I better be able, after 30 years, be able to, curl this like I did, whatever, like I'm so used to it. And I told him, I said, I don't know if I really believe that that's true for me. And you're talking about like really basic movement, right? Like a barbell curl. But I reincorporated when the shutdowns happened. I had to work out back at my parents' house, and I still have my like stuff from high school there. And I was doing barbell curls, and like while dieting the whole time, I was gaining like, and I was doing 3 sets, and at least one of those sets would gain a rep here and there. Obviously, after 15 years and dieting, I'm not gaining muscle in my biceps, but I was still readapting to doing it. Now, keep in mind that when I was, like in dental school, I was doing like 135 for like 8 reps on curls, at the end of my workout. Right now, obviously, this is not like the super strict form, but like that's what I was doing. So during this cut, I'm doing like, 70 pounds for 3 sets of 12 or something like that. So these are all things I've done before, but within that period, I got stronger. And I definitely agree that I think the neural adaptation for a totally new exercise could be months and months, for sure, if you've never done it before. So last thing I'll comment on the legs is my next experiment right now. So, I had the experiment where I didn't train my left calf for a whole year. Still haven't, by the way. And I'm probably just not going to. Like, I'll just keep this experiment going. Like, why not? No difference, ever. And then I'm now doing my left bicep has always been smaller, and it almost seems shaped different. Like some people would say, well, because like you're using your right, I'm right-handed, so you're using it for all these things. But I am so nuts with this stuff that I have become like ambidextrous by just trying to use my left hand. So I brush my teeth with my left hand now. I like put stuff away with my left hand. Like that's the level I've taken it. And it still stays about 1/2 inch smaller than my right. So again, I don't know if it's the shape or what. But I recently just incorporated leg press again, just for my left leg. And now we're 3 weeks into that. So I'm probably going to do that for a while and see if it makes any difference. Because like you, Aaron, my upper body is definitely better than my lower. And even though I've gotten quite strong on my lower, and I'm interested to see, like, because I have done all that stuff for legs. I have done 6 times a week frequency where I was doing Bulgarian training. Now that was squats, but even with non-squat exercises, I've done 3 times per week. And they've always just kind of lagged. So part of me was a little like demotivated, like, is it going to make any difference? But I'm curious to see if I just focus on like left leg for a while, it might actually, and I took the measurements and everything. So we'll see what happens.
That's awesome. I'm super into that experiment. When I was playing basketball as a youngster, my coach basically told me to do everything with my left hand. And I started doing the same thing, like dialing the phone, brushing the teeth, carrying the groceries, all these things. And a lot of these habits have stayed now. And I still feel like visually my left arm is definitely smaller. Like any photograph that I ever take is probably going to be my right arm from my left.
Yeah. And I don't know why that is. I mean, unless it's like, going back to like during development, maybe. Which maybe would be a good next topic is do things we do as, I mean, we talked about a little bit with like the pull-ups and whatnot, but I mean, everybody knows that if you don't start a sport until later, you're at a huge disadvantage, right? I mean, the best players in the world of almost any sport started when they were young, right? I mean, other than like maybe some like really niche sports. So could it be that like we from 0 to 20, we both just use our right hands for everything, that there was a difference in development there? I don't know. And Aaron, I know you said you felt like football in your younger years really gave you an advantage. And we kind of talked about like, I didn't feel that way, but that I was dieting a lot when I was young. And you kind of had this bulking phase throughout your entire, all of puberty, really, right?
It's the perma high school bulk.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm definitely open to the idea that could make a difference for sure. I don't know if you want to expand on anything on like either of your experiences with that, with the football stuff. I mean, did you feel like it's so hard to tell, right? Because obviously it's not a controlled trial. We don't know like what you would have looked like otherwise, but it seems like that probably gave you a pretty good base.
I think so. I think what it did is it was like environment, I think was really, really good. It was a very positive environment for me. Good way to spend my time, right? It was very driven. And then when you put a lot of that, even in this day, right? When you put a lot of like males together in a room and of some sort of like physical type capacity, you get that like competition that comes out, right? And I mean, 15, 16, 17-year-old high school kids where hormones are all pumping and things like that. It was just a wild environment. And, as you want to start lifting because you think girls are going to care and all that shit, I don't know. I don't know if my life would have turned out this way without that, because I don't know if I would have, when you're younger, you're just so impressionable. And I think that was, I loved it. I would go home, and then after I would train, and this was really dumb, but I would train for like an hour and a half after school, go home, eat dinner. And then we had like some weights in the basement, and I would go back down to the basement after dinner and train some more.
Did you stay relatively lean, or were you like pretty bulked up?
I would say probably like 20, maybe like 21, 22. Okay. And that really didn't hit until probably going into my senior year of football, when I went in at like 215 at only, 5'11".
Wow.
So that was like the year where, I think I just kind of outpaced it, because going into my junior year, I was only in the like high 180s. Okay. Mid high 180s going into that football season. And then I put on like another 20 some pounds going into my senior year. And that was like, I was probably like low 20s.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I think because a lot of the things that we did, right, they had us do some dumb stuff too. Like we would do dips at least 4 days per week, like all the time.
Wow.
My triceps are pretty big comparatively, and like I really don't like doing arms that much because I kind of feel like I don't have to. Because like
Yeah.
if I keep training them, they're just going to outpace everything else, and then I'm going to kind of look strange.
Yeah.
But the things that we did a lot of like are just kind of bigger on me now, and even though I don't train them that much.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the dumbest things I did. I mean, again, would it make a difference now? I tend to think not, because there are so many examples where you have somebody who didn't start until like they were 18 plus lifting, and they look pretty good. And like I said, my brother was pretty close to my size within like 4 or 5 years of lifting. Now he wrestled in high school like I did, but I was, well, okay, so I guess that's maybe a way to say it. I don't know if it would have made a huge difference to have stayed in a surplus, but I very well may have hurt myself by the chronic deficit. I mean, because I probably spent 4 months a year throughout high school in a significant deficit to the point, I mean, there was a year I was on the swim team and I would get up, do cardio, go to school, have a 3 hour swim practice, come home, and then work out. And I mean, it was just so dumb, but I was so set on having abs, like that was like all I cared about then. And I'd get to like 130 at my height at the time, maybe I was like 5'11", and still not have abs. It just wasn't in the cards for me at that age. And so I was just killing myself. And it very well may have, stunted something, maybe I'd be 6'2" now instead of 6'1". I don't know.
I echo a lot of the sentiments that you're speaking about regarding kind of the way that you were in high school.
Yeah.
I started lifting at 5'2" and 135 pounds.
Okay.
So you were like 5'11" and we were like the same weight.
Yeah.
Right. But I had this kid at school in 9th grade picked a fight with me and called me the Pillsbury Doughboy because I wasn't fat, but I was 5'2", 135. Like I was just had a baby fat on me. I hadn't hit puberty yet, all the things. And so I always kind of had this image of like, okay, I was a little chunky. I needed to be lean, and that would both help my basketball, of course, make me in better shape, but it would also impress the girls. And so I did the same thing, man. I would be up, and if we didn't have a basketball practice in the morning, which we had a couple times a week, then I would get up and do AM fasted cardio. And then I would eat my like 6 meals a day. That would be like, a quarter pound of roasted turkey and like a piece of whole wheat bread and an apple and like a bag of carrots or something like that. And that was like what I did 6 times a day for my meals. And then there would be basketball practices in there, and I would be working out 2 to 3 times a week. And like, it was all in this pursuit of being lean and having abs, which was the holy grail at that point. Right. So I graduated high school at 5'10", 170. So I don't even know how much of that gain was muscle, how much of it was just bone structure as I got bigger. But yeah, 5'10", 170. And then it wasn't until college where I gained 30 pounds in like 4 months just ate everything and lifted everything that I finally kind of became a man. Like it almost happened in like this 4-month period.
Wow. That's great. Yeah. It's hard to say, like, I like to say like, well, even if I'm not super impressive by like, internet standards, I put on probably 50 pounds of lean body mass at the same body fat compared to when I started. But, I'm comparing I started at like 13 years old. So, how much of that was just like bone and organ weight and things like that. Right. So.
You were 5'10", you said 5'11" at 13.
So, no, when I was 14, so my freshman year, I was 5'11" and 130 pounds. Yeah. I mean, if I show you pictures, maybe I'll like put a picture in here, but like when I was on the swim team, and I was so skinny, but like I said, I didn't know how to define it, but I knew there was a difference between skinny and like lean. Like I remember thinking like, I'm the skinniest kid in my class, right? At a small, like middle school, but I still didn't have abs, and that drove me nuts. Like it just wasn't happening. And then like for years and years, I'm like, I don't blame myself for that age, because like based on the information that I had, I thought it was totally possible. And I saw people in my age group who had it, and I was like, why wouldn't I be able to do it? But knowing what I know now, it just wasn't in the cards, and especially at that age. I mean, it's one thing to do it, it's hard maybe for me to diet down now and get like really good abs, but I can do it, and there's not like a big detriment to it. But as a 14-year-old, like it was just not good. And like, I was just not in a good place, I think, like psychologically with it all and everything like that. And so I feel for those people who, maybe they have, I have a couple clients who like, they're in this cycle and they're not even like wrong, you know. It's like they do have love handles, but it's like you do. I see what you're saying, but you also are so skinny and you have this disordered eating, and like you're like 5 steps away from the point where I feel comfortable dieting you down to get really lean. There's like so much to work on in between that, and it's very hard to tell somebody that who has this goal of like, no, but this is what I want, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Do you train abs now?
Dude, I haven't trained abs since I was like probably about 14. So.
I don't really train them either. Yeah.
I just don't like them. I don't like the feeling how, and then sometimes they cramp up.
Yeah,
you're like walking home and your abs cramp up. That's awful.
Oh yeah. No, I've definitely, I've had some almost paralyzing cramps during extracurricular activities, I'll say. And it's like, oh my God, like I need to stop right now. It can get pretty bad. So yeah.
That's funny.
The one thing I will say I do, if I do abs, ab wheel. I don't hate doing the ab wheel, but most other things, I'd probably be okay on the record saying I hate doing.
Yeah. And also like they've kind of been like, I have blockier abs. So like, I mean, if you look at like my dieting pictures, my abs are actually like pretty decent, and they're not like, I don't have like right now, I don't have like relaxed abs, but I'd have to be, I think, quite lean for that. But the other thing is I do have a naturally wider waist, and there's debate as to like, like people say, oh, or like our deadlift's going to widen your waist and things like that. One, I do feel like I had pretty strong core just from the other exercises I do. But two, I really don't want my waist any wider than it is. I mean, even when I'm quite lean, I still have like a 32-inch waist, whereas some people, when they get really lean, they're like 30, 29. I mean, do you guys know what at the navel, what your waistline is?
Not a clue.
No. Any idea, Bryan?
I don't, but I know for sure that I have a blockier waist as well. Like when I'm sitting around the body weight that I am right now, low to mid 190s, I wear 34 pants. And I mean, I need to do the belt loop and make it a little bit tighter. Yeah. But like, I don't know. That's all I know.
Yeah. I'm saying I wear 34 pants, but I know I do have like a kind of a small waist comparatively.
Yeah, you definitely do have a small waist, Aaron. So, it's another interesting thing to see, like different body types that you'll see. Even like, who was I talking with this about? I think it was, I'm totally blanking, but it was like recently we were having a conversation of like different people from different countries and like ethnicities have different, like on average, like different structures. And you'll see that like a guy who's like Icelandic, obviously, versus like, Thailand or something. Obviously that's like two really extremes, but it's not just the size of the body. It's like structurally, there's different proportions you see sometimes. You tend to see different trends, which I've always found kind of like the anthropometric aspect of it kind of interesting.
I agree. I think that's one thing I've noticed with a lot of my travels. So I've been, I've lived the majority of the time outside the U.S. for the last 2 years. And then one thing that's cool is you get to see people from all over, and that's like some of the Northern European people, like, I mean, the women, they're like my size, and they're, I mean, not in like a negative connotation at all, but they're just like super tall. They're like 6 foot tall, and it's like kind of common. And it's just really kind of wild that they're, people just are, anthropometrically different, different anatomical makeups. It's pretty wild to see.
Yeah, for sure. So I wanted to get a little bit into the nutrition side. How are you guys on time? I know you guys have some nap time.
Good for right now. The kid's still sleeping.
Okay. Aaron, you have kids too?
No. Oh my God, no.
All right. So, I think last time when we were talking, Aaron, you said one of the biggest differences for you was like really dialing in nutrition. And I guess, again, going back to like when we were all kind of younger and like obsessed with certain things and you kind of learn other things. And I was like very neurotic with every nutritional thing you could think of, like the timing, the amount of meals, I mean, just everything. And the first big, I guess, revelation I had was when I went to college, and between my freshman and sophomore year, I started intermittent fasting. I was really hesitant to do it because I was like, well, no, I need protein like every 2 hours. And for me, I just really didn't find a difference. Now, I will say, and I said this on a Q&A recently, if somebody said to me, I want to put the maximum amount of muscle on in a year, would I have them intermittent fast? I wouldn't. But that's really not based on my experience. That's just like kind of thinking mechanistically, it's probably better to have it. But my personal experience was it really didn't hurt my muscle growth at all. And I'm much less concerned now with timing. I just am like, get sufficient protein, calories. When we're dieting, I'll look a little bit more into specific maybe carb and fat ratios. But beyond that, I just haven't found huge differences. But it sounds like to you, Aaron, I mean, obviously you have a nutritional background. It sounds like it's a big thing for you. So maybe we have some differences there in our thoughts.
Yeah. One big caveat I want to make sure that we kind of put together there is like, the closer you get to your goal, the more important the nuance becomes. Mm-hmm. So if you're just like someone who's like, let's say you're a male, you're, I don't know, 23% body fat or something like that. And you're just like, hey, I just want to get in better shape and start, looking like I, lift. At that rate, you probably just need a lot better work on like your habits and some perceptions, lifestyle stuff. But as you get like nearing these spots, or nearing your goals, the harder, you have to work in terms of not necessarily like the effort you put in, but like the preciseness and things like that. Because at certain levels, like especially when you get into dieting and stuff, like you might be masking progress with like inflammation from, you eating foods that you didn't realize you have like a low grade, inflammatory response to. When you're holding extra water and you're like, why is this fat loss stalling? Fat loss isn't really stalling. You're just continuously putting food in your body that is making you retain water because you don't digest it really well. So there's like, it's just like this continuum, right? And kind of what I found, especially like myself right now, right? I'm eating 39, 80 calories per day. If I do that in 3 meals, I'm going to be a bloated freaking mess because it's too much, especially at those carbohydrates. That's, almost 200 grams of carbs every single meal. And then, 90 some grams of protein every single meal. Like that's going to bog me down. I'm going to be super full and uncomfortable. And it's one of those things is like by taking advantage of the hours of the day and making these like kind of micro adjustments that might not matter if you're just trying to like, hey, I want to put on muscle. But the deeper you go, the more refined your process needs to become to a certain degree.
Are you saying in terms, so you mentioned like you would feel more bloated and bogged down from a results standpoint, like if we had like a washout period of like, a week when we're not focusing on feeling, do you think that would make a big difference results wise?
It could, especially because the quality of your digestion, I do think will impact how efficient your body's going to be able to, produce, muscle protein synthesis, how much of absorption you get of the minerals and nutrients you're eating, how much of it will just kind of pass through. Mm-hmm. Because when you're bogging down your digestive system with like a massive meal, a 1,300 calorie meal, 1,400 calorie meal, I'm talking like low fat meals too.
Yeah.
You might not get a smooth digestion, right? Your body might you might pass over a threshold where you don't have like enough enzymes to sufficiently produce or sufficiently digest that as well as you could if you split that into 2 meals over like 4 hours as opposed to that one meal in an hour. So, I mean, I think when at the end of at the back end with the goal of hypertrophy and stuff, we're making these like large assumptions that digestion is completely equated for in normal,
right.
Inflammation and all these things. But if you give me someone who's, eating, we give, 2 people eating 3,000 calories, one person's, a farting, gassy mess who has diarrhea, twice a day. The other guy has perfect digestion. Everything's going much, more smoothly and he feels great. I think that second person's going to make more progress because like hypertrophy is not a primary cascade of metabolic function, right? It's like a secondary thing. If your digestive system is like a mess and it's fighting on trying to just get back to homeostasis, you're probably not going to be in a great position to put on as much muscle as you could. And another part of that could be from the stress response, right? When you're all messed up and your digestion's totally tanked, your cortisol is going to be different than it would be if it wasn't. And, we know that cortisol and testosterone work in an inverse relationship. So if we can bring cortisol down more consistently over that week, it allows for higher, testosterone levels, which again, are going to be important for recovery, training. Maybe you can get an extra rep now because you're better recovered. So these things over time, I think like can add up. Does it matter like in 1 week? Probably too short, but when you think about it in a long-term pattern, these things really do matter.
Yeah, I always wondered that. I mean, obviously a huge confounding variable there is like, so I'm saying, well, do you think it matters for muscle growth? But if somebody really is like having a ton of gas and, bloated and everything, huge confounding variable is they're almost certainly not going to have as productive workouts, right? So like, is it just that they're actually, you know, their digestion's off and everything, or is it because due to that, their workouts are sucking? And that's pretty hard to separate out. Ultimately, though, it doesn't really, I mean, it matters from like an intellectual standpoint, but at the end of the day, the results are still worse, right? So that's kind of like what we're talking about here. And I also wonder how much, though, that comes down to the pattern of eating you're used to, because obviously, you know, we do tend to adapt. And when I was eating 6 to 8 meals a day, the meals were, you know, 400 to 600 calories, right? And that was pretty normal for me. And it's funny because now I eat 3 meals a day, and I think back and I'm like, when was I satisfied with such small meals? Because now, and again, I'm not saying one is right or wrong, but I've always liked bigger meals. And I think for some people it can be problematic, you know, people with like eating disorders and stuff like that, if they're saving all their calories for the end. I like to do that, but I don't have any like eating issues in that regard. But like yesterday, I had 3,600 calories. And this is a more extreme example. It's usually not this much, but I had like 800 calories, 800 calories again. And then I had a 2,000 calorie meal, and I didn't feel like anything. To me, that was just a super normal meal. It was like one big savory thing and then one like kind of sweet, like banana ice cream thing I make. Felt fine. Now I'm eating way less carbs than you, I will add. You know, I'm having maybe 250 grams of carbs. So that's a lot different than 600 grams of carbs. And, you know, depending on like how fibrous the carbs you're eating and how much volume that is, that can make a big difference. But at this point, I feel like I'd almost be unsatisfied with smaller meals. And there's also some research to show that people who intermittent fast have lower levels of inflammation, although again, confounding variables, they tend to eat fewer calories, which correlates with lower levels of inflammation. So obviously it's a pretty complex topic.
It's definitely a complex topic, and it's really something I found like person to person, right? I think for me, I don't really like especially with like my clients, I say, hey, generally around 4 meals I find works best for a lot of people. It's a good starting point, right? I like a standard breakfast, lunch, dinner, and let's get a post-workout meal in, right? Because we can take advantage of the hormonal response that changes post-training, you know, help drive the cortisol down, shift back into parasympathetic. And what's kind of nice there is you can usually fit another meal in shortly because your hunger, like your body will just suck up that first meal. But I don't think when people are like, I want to start having 6 meals per day. I'm like, well, okay, well, why? Right now we're doing 3. Why do you think you need 6? With my, you know, own eating over the past, like since like 7, 8 months, I started at 4. And then when they started getting really big and, you know, kind of, I would be sitting there like sweating really bad. I'm like, okay, let's break this one out. I have an extra, you know, I have time here. Let's move it to 5. And then when I kind of maxed that out, now I'm like at 6. I think personally, I like the 4 to 5, I think is pretty good for me. The only time I do this 6 is when I have just such a high volume of food. I need to take advantage of the time for it.
Yeah. And kind of like what Bryan was saying about like the sets, right? It's almost like people would say like the frequency is like the benefit. It's like, well, maybe, but also one of the big values to the increased frequency of training is that you can distribute that volume over that. And from a meal standpoint, well, hey, if you're eating 2,000 calories, then 3 meals is I'm almost certain going to be fine. But then if you're eating 4,000 or 5,000 calories, I can eat that in 3 meals, but a lot of people would have a difficult time doing that. So it makes sense just to distribute it from a practical standpoint.
Practical for sure. The next level deep that I usually like to go there is blood sugars. So if someone has like a little bit of insulin resistance, right, and that, you know, 3 meals with 200 grams of carbs in them each, or 150 grams of carb, whatever, is going to skyrocket your blood glucose. And then that might impact like your energy levels, and you get that post, you know, meal kind of dip. By spreading that out a little bit more, we can kind of keep more even keeled blood glucose levels, which impacts like energy and stuff like that. And opposed to, you know, keeping with whether our goal is like mitigating fat gain as we're eating up, you know, keeping your blood sugar a little bit more kind of stable will help too with that. And so it's not shoving, you know, creating such a robust insulin spike in response to that.
I have thoughts on that, but before I do it, Bryan, I know we've been over talking you for a little. Anything to add there?
I will just say that I tend to align more with kind of your thoughts on the situation, at least from like a preference standpoint. And I know preference doesn't always equal optimality. I did like pure IF from like 2012 to 2020. I really had like 2 meals a day, and they were both massive. And my window shrunk from like an 8-hour eating window to, by the end, I would have some days with like a 4-hour eating window, or even some days with just one meal. Like it was almost like a challenge to see how long I could go and not eat and then eat.
And just to point out real quick, that's a lot of, you had that before and after picture of you at the same weight, which I think was 2014 to like now, right?
That was 2007. That was 2007 to now, or 2006 to now. But it had a large portion of that in it.
Was it? Yeah.
But since like, so I will say that, I think that, as Aaron said, when you get closer to your goal and you're looking to really optimize down to the final piece, it becomes that much more important. So when I did my diet from June to September, it's like a 13-week diet, I went from 205 to 185. I dialed it in much more effectively there. It was actually the first time that I really strategically stopped intermittent fasting and purposefully added in calories earlier in the day. But what I found was that I really didn't enjoy eating earlier in the day. I knew I had to, and it was part of the process. And I also tend to work out.
Dieting?
Yeah, for dieting. And then I also tend to work out in the morning. So I didn't want to work out and then not eat for so many hours. I wanted to protect muscle, etc. So I fell into this pattern of kind of having 100 grams of more or less liquid protein throughout the morning period. And I would just kind of like, have 30 here, 30 there, 30 there. And over the course of 4 or 5 hours, I would get 100 grams of protein, but there wouldn't be any food in it. And then I would still have my 2 big meals at like, 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. or whatever. And that tended to work pretty well for me. And I felt confident that at least I was getting that MPS response that I was looking for earlier in the day.
Is that why? Because I would agree. Like I had a client recently, and it's funny, like you got to make sure you go over everything sometimes, because I found out like 6 weeks in that he was working out at like 8 a.m. and then he was eating his first meal at like 1 p.m. And I was like, okay, I guess I didn't cover this. Please eat after your workout. Now, and not ironically, but interestingly, he's made amazing progress despite that. So it goes to show, I mean, when you still have a lot of progress left to make, a lot of things will work. But was there a reason besides the fact that you were working out in the morning that you felt you needed to eat earlier? Because I agree with that reason, but I don't know.
Yeah. I wanted the MPS response. I'd been listening at that point to a ton of the Stronger by Science stuff. And they really were talking about how, like, as Aaron said, the 4 meal piece being like 4 is better than 3 kind of idea. And, I see the argument for why IF is good and bad for both dieting and for gaining, right? Like for gaining, obviously you're getting less MPS response. You're slamming all this protein into this period. You don't know if it's going to get all digested, blah, blah, blah. I've never had a problem gaining weight and massing with 2 big meals a day. But when it comes down to dieting, because I know that I'm putting my body in this depleted state, it just felt more important to me. And so I made the decision that, adding liquid in was going to be kind of a nice compromise for myself to make sure I was hitting those metrics that I was looking for.
Yeah, that's pretty consistently what I do almost every day. It's like a shake in the morning, and it's like I'm a morning person, and I used to eat these huge breakfasts. It's like because I believed in that, I would always have my first meal was my biggest, and then it would gradually get smaller and smaller to the point that like my 7th meal was like 2 eggs or something, and now it's like totally the opposite because I enjoy eating at night. And so in the morning, I'll just have a shake because every once in a while, I'll actually make a big meal. But like when I wake up and I'm like rushing to work, it's just so much easier to just drink this on the way to work than to like have like this huge bowl of food or something. And then at lunch, I'm working. So I don't want to eat this huge meal and then go do like 5 hours of like dental work. I'm just like, ugh. So I have like, a normal size meal. And then when I come home, I have a pretty big meal. And there is some research to show that's maybe not ideal. There is some that shows benefits to time restricted feeding and having that earlier in the day, to having the bulk of your calories. I think if you would do everything like perfectly, that's probably how I would arrange it. I don't know if it makes enough of a difference though for me to drastically change from my preference, to come home and like, I don't have my own family right now or any kids, but like when I do, I don't want to come home and there's this family dinner and now I got I'm like, no, guys, I'm going to have my 300 calorie meal here. Sorry, I already had a 1500 calorie breakfast, you know?
Yeah. Well, part of the, I think, thing I loved and what gravitated me towards intermittent fasting so much was the kind of mental acuity piece that comes with being fasted in the morning. And then also kind of the way that you're not distracted by food. So I think the distraction fits both physiologically in that your body's not distracted with like this process of digestion that kind of bogs your brain down a little bit, or at least it feels that way.
Yeah.
As much as it is also the distraction of having to like prepare and think about food that you're going to put in your mouth. So I really enjoy that. And I think that's why I've kind of gravitated more toward just the liquid in the morning, because like you said, it's just simple. It's easy. It doesn't bog my brain down. But it supplies my muscles with, you know, the protein that it needs. So I think overall it's been like a net positive for me.
Yeah. Last thing on nutrition that I want to touch on, Aaron, like you just started talking about the glucose, and I mean, I've never had any glucose issues on like blood work. I've bought like a monitor for ketones that also measures blood glucose. And interestingly, there was one time I was this past diet and I was like, I'm just going to do like a keto cheat day, kind of just to see what would happen. I ate 8,000 calories of keto food, which was like, I actually enjoyed it, but like normally I wouldn't. But like, but it was like a lot of Quest bars, like heavy cream, things like that. Again, don't recommend this, just something I tried. And shockingly to me, I had over 300 grams of carbs through, and like a lot of it was like the fiber and things that are in these like Quest bars and whatnot. And I stayed in ketosis the whole time, despite 300 plus grams of the carbs in there, which I found very interesting. In contrast to another time fasted, I had maybe like 50 grams of carbs, like just carbs from like candy. And my glucose shot up to like, I don't know, like 130 or something like that. Whereas that whole day on the keto cheat day, it was like 80 or below the whole time. So that's just, you know, interesting story. But I don't know, Aaron, like it sounds like you focus on the blood glucose thing. Is that something that you're measuring throughout the day, or you're just kind of thinking about it more?
No, generally kind of like fasting numbers,
Okay.
because we know, like, let's say we're in a gaining phase, right? And your fasting blood glucose numbers start creeping up into the low 100s, 110s or something like that. It's from a health standpoint too, right? Especially with like, diabetes in your pancreas. We know it's best to like, okay, we're either going to pull things back a little bit. Maybe we've pushed a little bit too hard. Maybe stress and cortisol is a little bit too high, systemic level that's kind of pushing that. And just knowing that like so that's like one side of it, right? The other kind of side of it that I will look at when starting a diet. So when you're starting a diet, if you're already in a good range, the first like couple of weeks of that diet will be a little bit easier because your fasting blood glucose is already in a better range. When it's higher, right, we know that there's just more glucose in the system. Your body's going to preferentially, obviously, always burn glucose when it's available. So just kind of, you can modify diet a little bit there, pulling carbs a little bit down, pushing carbs over to fat, or even just creating a little bit more of a deficit to help kind of get you in a more optimal position to kind of, start putting one foot in front of the other from.
Are you finding that you have a significant number of clients getting to 100 plus during a bulk when fasted?
It depends. So one thing that's really, really wild is like other parts of people's lives, right? So if someone's working like night shift or something like that, yeah, their blood glucose will be higher. When different parts of your lifestyle will kind of fight against your natural physiology, like night shift is one. Someone's in like a super stressful period in their life, maybe they're going through a divorce or something like that, they'll be significantly higher. So it's been really, really wild. This has been like a newer, like the past year, I would say 2020, part of my business and with clients, like paying a lot more attention to these other seemingly not as direct aspects, but have like these large cascading effects that essentially make the fat loss, the muscle building things harder because of their effects on your physiology and how you feel, how you perform, your mood, performance, and that type of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think probably, and maybe we've all experienced this, like when you're young and working out, there's a lot of things you just don't even think of, right?
Not even on the radar.
Yeah, like I've had a lot of blood work done in my life, like a lot. And my glucose is, I mean, I always get it done because I get a CMP done, so it's just on there. But like the highest I've ever had was like 95, and usually it's somewhere between like 65 to 90. So it's just like I just breeze through it when I'm looking, you know. But yeah, obviously, I mean, it's something that can be a serious problem if you're young and active. It's almost never a problem, but as you know, if you are bulking up and you're 30s, certainly your 40s, I mean, these are things you actually have to look at.
Yeah, because it's like we have these physique goals, performance type goals, but as we get a little bit older, right? Like I'll be 33 in a couple weeks. They're fun and all, but like I'm concerned about my health. You know what I mean? I don't care if my legs grow an extra half inch, if my cholesterol is like sky high and I'm having all these lipid issues. Like, no, it's important to consider like as we get a little bit older, and especially when you have like a family and that sort of stuff, when you need to provide and make sure that you're there to help take care of people.
Right. Yeah. And Bryan, you're 37?
38.
38. Damn, I just don't get that, man. You do not look 9 years older than me. Yeah, both of you guys look great. And I don't know if you guys know Vigorous Steve. I just had him on my podcast. He's like a YouTuber, but he's 37 or 38 as well. And just like, it's funny because like a lot of people I find in like the industry actually look worse, especially those who use like performance enhancing drugs. Just seems to like age you. But I don't know. You guys are doing well.
Yeah, one thing that's been thank you. I'm at a point now, like I'm excited to get older. Like as this time goes on, I feel better and better, especially because like I had a rough patch in the last couple of years, like my time doing CrossFit, where I was just, my body was falling apart a bunch. So like it's great. Like I feel fantastic. It's been really, really cool, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was consistently doing heavy squats and deadlifts, and I remember thinking like, oh my God, if my back is this bad now at 21, I mean, I never really had a serious injury, but I remember I was doing pull-ups and like something, my lat popped. I was doing, when I was doing bench press and I was doing incline, I was getting like a lot stronger, and my pec, it was like, I was like, if I do one more rep, this is going to tear. Like, thankfully there was a warning, but it was like not good. And then there was probably twice where I went really heavy on deadlifts and like, I couldn't bend over to put my socks on. I mean, it was bad. And I was like, what's it going to be like when I'm like 30? But now I just don't train like an idiot all the time. And I actually very rarely am injured. So
you can do dumb shit in any exercise endeavor.
Yeah.
And so like you said, you fucked your back up, or you could barely bend over to put your sock on. Doing bodybuilding or strength training style training, we decided to do a workout that was like 315 deadlift for 50 reps as quickly as possible with like some box jumps in the middle, and it produces the same response where your toothbrush falls and you're like, fuck, this toothbrush, it's on the ground, like, what am I going to do now? This is awful. So I think that, to our audience, like as ex-CrossFitters, like I still speak to, I would say half my audience is probably ex-CrossFitters at this point, or current CrossFitters. And I call hypertrophy training a sustainable method. Like that's part of the marketing that I use in the language that I speak about it, is like, you have this dumb shit that you've been doing, and then you have hypertrophy training. And even though you can still do dumb shit in hypertrophy training, like, it's a lot more likely that you're going to do it in a sustainable manner where you can continue doing this for many years going forward.
Yeah, for sure. So last question for you guys, and I don't know if both of you incorporate it, but I know, Aaron, I saw you incorporating, I think you said you've been incorporating really cold showers for a while, and then I saw you do like an ice bath. That's not an area I've really delved into much at all. I did have somebody ask me about it, and I kind of had to defer, just because most of the research I've seen talking about it showed at best like some mild benefits, and then I've seen other people who were really into both cold therapy and sauna. That gets, I think, a little bit out of the like standard fitness space, So I don't know, what was your reasoning behind it, and what did you find?
For me, the cold, I did a year of cold showers, only taking cold showers. It was more of just like a mental challenge, really. I'd say if anything, from what I read, all of the physical benefits were incredibly marginal, like probably immeasurable.
Yeah.
If anything, with like the cold tubs, it probably blunts some of the hypertrophy response. So, I mean, that's something I think if you were doing consistently, it would probably be a disadvantage. The showers for me were purely just a challenge. So our hot water heater went out. We were living in Colombia at the time, in South America, and they just didn't show up to fix it for like 10 days. So I was like, oh, I don't have a choice. I need to take a shower, right? So I was taking cold showers, and then I was like, well, I did 10. Like maybe I can do 20. And then 20 turned into like 50, 50 turned into 100. And I was like, I'm just going to go for a year.
Wow.
So that was just a big mental challenge. The ice baths were like a week or two ago here, a guy in Playa del Carmen was doing it. And I wanted to see like, hey, would that year of cold showers like change how I would respond to like really cold temperatures? You know what I mean? And I was surprised it did. It just kind of felt, it was cold, but it felt like almost a comfortable feeling. And there was a handful of people there. Other guys got in and immediately hit that like that shock response, right, where they start like hyperventilating and stuff, but it just didn't happen to me. And I was really, really surprised. And I think it was only because I was used to being cold from taking those cold showers for a year.
Had you done an ice bath before to gauge it?
Only in high school when we had to do it for football. And it was like, okay, you're in for 2 minutes. And it was awful, like full blown, like teeth chattering, like, like shaking real bad, and a very not fun experience. And then like this past, or 2 weekends ago, whatever, I did 8 minutes, like not much issue.
Okay. Wow. So it does sound like mostly it was like a mental thing for you.
Mental. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I saw one guy, I don't know what his credentials were. He was talking to somebody else who I do respect, but the other guy didn't really comment on it. And he was saying how, like, the body is just like, you just need to put it through stress, which, there is something to be said for a hermetic response. Right. But he was acting like, this would just be the cure to everything. And I'm like, man, like I've seen more benefit in research from sauna and like really hot temperatures than I have seen from cold. I really don't know if again, other than the mental aspect. I mean, I will say, like, after a really cold shower, you can come out of, even acutely, you can feel really good after that. Almost like a clear-headed thought. But I don't know if, like, physiologically I'd expect much. But the sauna I'm kind of interested in. I don't do it. I don't know if you guys have looked into it at all, but it does seem like there are actually some benefits to it beyond just what you'd get from like working out, for instance.
Yeah, I think with the sauna, you get a little bit more this is from my standpoint, and the first, from what I have seen, I see more of like your evidence-based type people speaking more positively about the sauna than I do as opposed to the ice baths and stuff.
You can say something, Bryan?
Anecdotally, when we were doing CrossFit, my knees were always beat up, like constantly in shambles. And the apartment complex I was living in at the time had a hot tub, which is, heat therapy, similar idea. And I would go in there twice a day. Like my knees actually would notice a difference. So we went on vacation for a week and I didn't have access to the hot tub, but I continued training. And by the end of that week, like I was hobbling just in daily life to get around. And then as soon as I got back to my apartment and started doing my like twice daily, 15 to 20 minute hot tubs, at least my knees were functioning again and I could continue to squat. So. Right.
Yeah. I'll have to look into, cause I have done, like I said, like daily squatting and I never had knee issues. I always felt like kind of lucky in that regard. And I wanted to do, like dunk training, like dunk a basketball. And within like 2 weeks, my knees were killing me just from the high impact. So I just stopped. I just didn't care about the goal that much. And then, like I could dunk like a tennis ball. But in order to actually, to palm a basketball and to get that over, you need a few more inches. So, then I recently set a running goal. And again, I stopped and took a break because I probably went too hard, too fast, but just going on like the treadmill within, again, like 3 weeks, my knees were killing me. Do you guys ever like run? Or do you just do like biking or for cardio?
I just walk.
Yeah, I really like walking. I'm a big fan of the spin bike for like warming up. So you can like, obviously we can turn the dial to change the resistance pattern. I love that, especially for leg days. There are times where I kind of want to bring in some HIIT or whatever. And if I were to do that again, it would only be short hill sprints.
Yeah.
I think my running days are behind me.
Yeah. Did you guys ever do remember like your best mile times or anything like that when you were young?
6 flat, basically.
Okay.
All I know is it wasn't impressive when I was like 120 pounds. So as an adult, it's probably even less impressive.
Right. Well, my goal, Bryan, is a 6-minute mile just because I never did it. And I wasn't like a runner at all. Right. But I think I had like a 6:30 when I was like, anorexically skinny. So I was like, okay, if I could do a 6-minute mile now, like that'd be pretty cool. And part of it is because it's like I like objective goals and things that I can measure. And like with running, I don't like a mile time is the only thing people even like have a reference for. I feel like, like from high school and stuff like that. Cause like other than that, if I have a bike here, like inside, but I don't know what I would even set for like this generic bike goal. You know what I mean? So it's really just to see if I can do it. And it would be cool if I could do, so like I recently hit 225 for 16 bench. And like there's like some things where if I could do them all at the same time, that would be cool. Maybe like a 225 overhead press while doing like a 6-minute mile run, like things where, because obviously the fatter I get, the stronger my overhead press is going to be, but then the slower I'm going to become, so to be able to do all of it.
I just saw something, I think it was a couple months back by now, but I just saw it the other day. This CrossFit guy, he's in San Diego, deadlifted 500 pounds and then ran a sub 5-minute mile. Yeah. Like immediately after, like they pulled out the weights on the track, he hit it. Wow. And then he's a big dude too. I think he's bigger than all three of us.
Really?
So it was pretty impressive.
He's not genetically average, Dave.
Yeah, man. No, some people are just like, but I marvel at that stuff, man. Like people think like I complain about it. And it's like, look, I'm only complaining that the people who will act like it doesn't matter at all. Like that to me is just ridiculous. But if you've like accepted that this is a thing, like I marvel at that. Like I would marvel at like Stephen Hawking's intelligence. I just think it's like awesome to just see what is possible. Even if I'm never going to get close to that, it's just cool to see these outliers,
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about is like literally what we were trying to achieve in CrossFit the whole time, right? To be like the strongest one, but also be fit and have endurance and be able to apply all these different characteristics at the same time. And like, ultimately it really led to just not being great at anything.
Yeah, right. That's the thing. It's hard. And you would probably have to specialize in something, then just try to maintain that while you specialize in something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's what it really turned into for me. I was hanging on the endurance type stuff. I just wanted to get strong, and then I would just complain a lot at the end of the day.
I did. A few of us went to my gym recently, and there was like a bunch of treadmills in a row, and so I said, all right, just like kind of like a test of will. Let's set it to 10 miles an hour, which is 6-minute mile pace, and just see who can go the longest. And so one tapped out at 3:20, and then the other one tapped out at like 3:30. So I was like, all right, let's go. So I made it to 4 minutes. So I know I could at least like keep the pace for a while. I'm not there yet. And again, any runner who listens to this would probably think this is like so pathetic, like so bad. But for me, but it was definitely like an ego thing. I tried to get into the zone. And once I stopped, as anybody who's ever pushed themselves knows, like there's that adrenaline high. And then once that, goes away, you're like, oh crap. And like, I like was dead. Like my lungs, and of course this is like peak COVID time. So I'm like hacking my lungs out in the gym. I like ran across to like the grocery store and was like, like the spray that's supposed to soothe your throat. I was like drinking this. I was like, this was such a dumb idea. But when you get competitive like that, I think all of us kind of understand that competitive spirit. So
500-meter row test, dude. That was the CrossFit one that would leave you just in shambles for like the rest of the day. Like you do the 500-meter row test and you're just like on the ground for at least an hour.
Yeah, I don't even have a reference for what that would look like. How long would that be?
It's a great time. Like my best time I think was 1:26 and change or something like that. But it's like
a minute and 26?
A minute 26. Okay. Yeah, it's like running a similar
like
amount of distance.
Meter or something
Yeah, 400 meter would probably be faster, but similar energy system.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Cool. Yeah, rowing is something I've almost never done. People always say it's great. It's just I've been on a rowing machine maybe like twice in my life. So. Cool.
It's awful.
All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time for this. This was good. Pretty much covered everything. So where can people find more of your stuff?
I'm at evolvedtrainingsystems.com. You can also find me under Evolved Training Systems or my name, Bryan Boorstein, on the gram.
Cool. Aaron?
For me, you can find me on Instagram at Aaron_Straker. Or my nutrition coaching company, StrakerNutritionCo.com. And then Bryan and I host a podcast together called Eat, Train, Prosper.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thanks again. I'll, of course, have links to all of that below.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for having us, Dave.